I've often heard people say, push the tempo, but that doesn't seem very nice when he's a grasshopper. He's just a little guy, leave him alone! Now here's a Sega franchise that time quickly forgot. It's Tempo, the wacky alien grasshopper guy who does platforming around music-themed stages. Developed by Red Entertainment of Bonk and Sakura Wars fame, the entire Tempo franchise is exclusive to 3 different Sega consoles, and in this video we're going to take a look at every game in the series, starting with...
You know what time it is. Yo homie, peep here! Tempo, check it out, you know he makes it funky, and he's good to go. Everything, catch the groove in New York, LA, and San Francisco.
Tempo's the house tonight. You know it's gonna move your mind. The groove is out of sight.
The groove is out of sight.
As funky as you wanna be. Tempo's in the house tonight.
Tempo's in the
You know
house.
it's gonna move your mind. The groove is out of sight.
The groove is out of sight.
As funky as you wanna be.
1995's Tempo for the 32X. Originally in development for the Mega Drive, the game was converted to a 32X title and makes some limited use of the new hardware for sprite scaling and some sampled audio. In this game you play as Tempo the Grasshopper, who is competing in a dance contest on the Major Minor show, which you briefly see between stages. A character called King Dirge wants to win the contest and is trying to force Tempo and his girlfriend Katie out of the contest by attacking them with his minions, and that forms the main gameplay loop of Tempo. You run and jump around colourful stages, defeating the minions while collecting music notes for help. There's a little more to it than that because you can kick enemies, throw notes at them to stun them, and you can also hover in mid-air, which makes for better control while exploring the stages. You can also run by double tapping left or right. There's a selection of other items to find hidden around the stages, but the main goal for every stage is to run and jump around, defeat bad guys and find the exit. After a few stages you will have to fight a boss, which requires you to learn its attack pattern, and then you move on to a new stage to do the whole thing again in a new location. What makes Tempo unique is its gorgeous animation and absolutely bonkers artwork. The game is aggressively colourful, and the backgrounds can actually be quite distracting in places. It really goes hard in regards to its visual presentation, and it can be a bit of a detriment to the game itself as everything is so difficult to discern. The controls are a little fiddly and it's not very clear where the hitboxes are on enemies and obstacles. Also, running by double tapping is almost always a bad idea, as you're bound to collide with something and take damage, so you often find yourself playing very cautiously, which feels at odds with the bright colourful chaos that's happening around you at all times. It's not a bad game and you can definitely get used to its controls with enough perseverance, but it's not a game that instantly grabs you due to how incongruous it all is. It definitely stands out as a part of the 32X library, but due to the limited install base it might have fared better on the Mega Drive where it could have reached a wider audience. Tempo Jr. would release in 1995 for the Game Gear. It actually came out 1 month after the original game's release, and development was handled by Sims, who were also responsible for Ristar on the Game Gear. The game largely follows the same plot as the original game, where you're trying to compete in a dance contest on the Major Minor show, except this time a new bad guy called Zenza has kidnapped your girlfriend Katie, and you have to rescue her in time for the contest. Tempo Jr. feels more like a scaled down version of the original game instead of its own thing, but the limitations of the Game Gear hardware means it can't pull off the same visual flair of the original game. This is actually a good thing, as it makes Tempo Jr. a lot friendlier to play. You can easily discern enemies, and the controls are simplified too. You no longer have separate attack buttons for kicking and throwing musical notes, you jump with one button and throw notes with the other. When an enemy is stunned, you simply walk into them to defeat them, and the game will play the relevant attacking animation to make it feel really satisfying. You can also do the hovering if you press the jump button again in mid-air, and you can also run by double tapping, but it feels a lot more manageable in Tempo Jr. for whatever reason. Maybe it's a little restrained in comparison to the original game? On the whole, Tempo Junior is a much easier game that feels more targeted at a younger demographic, but it's also a much more accessible title that successfully scales down the action of the original game, but without all the distracting nonsense. As much as I prefer the look of the original game, it is definitely a more frustrating thing to play than Tempo Junior. I had a surprisingly good time with Tempo Junior, which actually benefits from not being able to do as much as its bigger brother. Sure, it's another mascot platformer in a sea of mascot platformers, but it's a pretty good one all things considered.
You know what time it is. Yo, homie, peep this! Tempo, check it out, you know, he makes it funky, and he's good to go. Oh, dang, catch the move, New York, LA, and San Francisco.
Tempo's in the house tonight. You know it's gonna move your mind. The groove is out of sight. As funky as you wanna be. Tempo's in the house tonight. You know it's gonna move your mind. The groove is out of sight. As funky as you wanna be.
The final entry in the Tempo series would release exclusively in Japan for the Sega Saturn in 1998, and with this title we see Red Entertainment take up development duties once again. Super Tempo is once again a 2D platformer, but with the power of the Saturn it can really flex its visuals with some beautiful artwork and animation that feels like the logical step up from the first game. There's more of a little stinker energy to Super Tempo, like it's following the gross out comedy of something like Ren and Stimpy, which certainly makes it unique amongst Japanese developed platformers. This time you're playing as Tempo and Katie again, but you're actually working to pay off your bankruptcy. You collect music notes to earn money, which is then tallied up at the end of the stage. You're still exploring large stages, jumping on enemies and trying to find an exit, but the stage designs now do a lot more, and often require you to explore into the scenery by pressing up to enter buildings and explore new paths. You no longer have the note attack to stun enemies, instead having a new bubble attack which encases enemies in a bubble, which can then be burst to defeat them. The graphics in general are a lot easier to pass than the original game, while still being bright and colourful. The developers have just got a better knack for designing stages that have better contrast between enemies and the backgrounds. There's a much more substantial game here that is loaded with minigames, wacky boss fights, and new stuff to do that helps keep the action varied and less repetitive. One stage requires you to find 4 animals that are hidden around the stage before bringing them to a door that will only unlock once you have all 4. It's a simple premise, but it helps Super Tempo feel like a more grandiose adventure that isn't only about running to the right to find the exit and defeating a bad guy or 2 on the way. This is also a surprisingly import-friendly experience, despite being released exclusively in Japan. Yes, there is some story and cutscenes that play out between stages that only have Japanese subtitles, but the actual in-game action is perfectly playable with no knowledge of Japanese, so don't be put off if any of this looks intriguing. And with that we come to the end of the Tempo series. The franchise was definitely a short-lived one, but it had a lot of style that really helped it stand out, and I'd love to see it revive someday. Red Entertainment do appear to still exist in some form, and they even revived another of their properties recently in the form of Gungrave Gore, so who knows? Either way, Tempo is a strange footnote in Red Entertainment's history, and the studio definitely had more success with the Sakura Wars franchise than anything else. Which is a shame because I love their PS2 output specifically, especially games like Gungrave and Gungrave Overdose, the Dororo game Blood Will Tell, and Bujingai Swordmaster, which features the Japanese pop star Gact of all people.